Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. Part 4, Christmas Future.
The bell struck 12. Scrooge looked about him for the ghost and saw it not. As the last stroke ceased to vibrate, he remembered the prediction of old Jacob Marley, and lifting up his eyes beheld a solemn phantom, draped and hooded, coming like a mist along the ground towards him. The phantom slowly, gravely, silently approached. It was shrouded in a deep black garment which concealed its head, its face, its form, and left nothing of it visible save one outstretched hand. Its presence filled Scrooge with a solemn dread. The spirit neither spoke nor moved. "I am in the presence of the ghost of Christmas yet to come." The spirit answered not, but pointed onward with its hand. "You are about to show me the shadows of the things that have not happened, but will happen in the time before us," Scrooge pursued. "Is that so, spirit?" The spirit inclined its head. That was the only answer he received. "Ghost of the future, I fear you more than any spectre I have seen. But as I know your purpose is to do me good, and as I hope to live to be another man from what I was, I am prepared to bear you company, and to do it with a thankful heart. Will you not speak to me? Well, lead on. Lead on. The night is waning fast, and it is precious time to me, I know." They scarcely seemed to enter the city, for the city rather seemed to spring up about them and encompass them of its own act, but there they were, in the heart of it. The spirit stopped beside one little knot of businessmen. Observing that the hand was pointed to them, Scrooge advanced and listened to their talk.
"No,"
said a great fat man with a monstrous chin.
"I don't know much about it either way. I only know he's dead."
"When did he die?"
inquired another.
Last night, I believe."
"Why, what was the matter with him?"
asked a third, taking a vast quantity of snuff out of a very large snuff-box.
"I thought he'd never die."
"God knows," said the first with a yawn. "What has he done with all his money?"
"I haven't heard," said the man with the large chin, yawning again. "Left it to his company, perhaps. He hasn't left it to me, that's all I know." This pleasantry was received with a general laugh. "But it's likely to be a very cheap funeral," said the same speaker. "But upon my life, I don't know of anybody to go to it. Suppose we make up a party and volunteer."
"Well, I don't mind going for lunches provided, but I must be fed."
They left the busy scene and went to an obscure part of the town where Scrooge had never penetrated before, although he recognised its situation and its bad repute. The ways were foul and narrow, the shops and houses wretched, the people half-naked, drunken, slipshod, ugly. Alleys and archways, like so many cesspools, disgorged their offences of smell and dirt and life upon the straggling streets, and the whole quarter reeked with crime, with filth and misery. Far in this den of infamous resort there was a low-browed, beetling shop below a penthouse roof, where iron, old rags, bottles, bones, and greasy offal were bought. Sitting in among the wares he dealt in by a charcoal stove made of old bricks was a grey-haired rascal, smoking his pipe in all the luxury of calm retirement. Scrooge and the Phantom came into the presence of this man, just as a woman with a heavy bundle slunk into the shop. But she had scarcely entered when another woman, similarly laden, came in too, and she was closely followed by a man in faded black.
"Let the charwoman alone to be the first," cried she who had entered first. "Let the laundress alone to be the second, and let the undertaker's man alone to be the third. Well, look here, old Joe, here's a chance. If we haven't all three met here without meaning it." "You couldn't have met in a better place," said old Joe, removing his pipe from his mouth. "Come into the parlour. We're all suitable to our calling. We're well matched. Come into the parlour." The parlour was the space behind a screen of rags. The old man raked the fire together with an old stair-rod, and having trimmed his smoky lamp with the stem of his pipe, put it in his mouth again. While he did this, the woman who had already spoken threw her bundle on the floor and looked with a bold defiance at the other two. "What odds, then? What odds, Mrs. Dilber?" said the woman. "Every person had a right to take care of themselves, he always said."
"Oh, that's true indeed," said the laundress. "No man more so."
"Why then, who's the worse for loss of a few things like these? Not a dead man, I suppose. If he wanted to keep them after he was dead, why weren't he more natural in his lifetime? If he had been, he'd had someone to look after him when he was struck with death, instead of lying gasping out his last there, alone, by himself." Here, open that bundle, old Joe, and let me know the value of it. Open the bundle, Joe.
But the man in faded black, mounting the breech first, produced his plunder. It was not extensive. A seal or two, a pencil case, a pair of sleeve buttons, and a brooch of no great value were all. They were severally examined and appraised by old Joe, who chalked the sums he was disposed to give for each upon the wall, and added them up into a total when he found there was nothing more to come.
"That's your account," said Joe, "and I wouldn't give another sixpence if I was to be boiled for not doing it. Who's next?"
Mrs. Dilber was next. Sheets and towels, a little wearing apparel, 2 old-fashioned silver teaspoons, a pair of sugar tongs, and a few boots. Her account was stated on the wall in the same manner.
"I always gives too much to the ladies. It's a weakness of mine, and that's the way I ruin myself," said old Joe. "That's your account. If you ask me for another penny and make it an open question, I'd repent of being so liberal and knock off half a crown."
"Now undo my bundle, Joe,"
said the first woman. Joe went down on his knees for the greater convenience of opening it, and having unfastened a great many knots, dragged out the large and heavy roll of some dark stuff.
"Well, what do you call this?" said Joe. "Bed curtains?"
"Ah!" returned the woman, laughing and leaning forward on her crossed arms.
"Bed curtains?"
"Oh, you don't mean to say you took them down, rings and all, with him lying there?"
"Yes, I do," replied the woman. "Why not? Don't drop that oil on the blankets now."
"His blankets?"
asked Joe. "Well, whose else's do you think?" replied the woman. "He isn't so likely to take cold without them, I dare say."
"I hope he didn't die of anything catching, eh?" said old Joe, stopping his work and looking up.
"Don't you be afraid of that," returned the woman. "I ain't so fond of his company that I'd loiter about him for such things if he did. Oh, no, you may look through that shirt till your eyes ache, but you won't find an hole in it, nor a threadbare patch. It's the best he had, and a fine one too. They'd have wasted it if it ain't been for me."
"Well, what do you call the wasting of it?"
asked old Joe.
"Putting it on him to be buried in, to be sure," replied the woman with a laugh. "Somebody was fool enough to do it, but I took it off again. If calico ain't good enough for such a purpose, it ain't good enough for anything. It's quite becoming to the body. He can't look uglier than he did in that one."
Scrooge listened to this dialogue in horror. As they sat grouped about their spoil, in the scanty light afforded by the old man's lamp, he viewed them with a detestation and disgust which could hardly have been greater, though they were demons, marketing the corpse itself.
laughed the same woman. "This is the end of it, you see. He frightened everyone away from him when he was alive, to profit us when he was dead."
"Spirit!" said Scrooge, shuddering from head to foot.
I see. The case of this unhappy man might be my own. My life tends that way now. Merciful heaven, what is this?"
He recoiled in terror, for the scene had changed, and now he almost touched a bed, a bare, uncurtained bed, on which, beneath a ragged sheet, there lay something covered up, which, though it was dumb, announced itself in awful language. The room was very dark, too dark to be observed with any accuracy, but a pale light fell straight upon the bed, and on it, plundered and bereft, unwatched, unwept, uncared for, was the body of this man. Scrooge glanced towards the phantom. Its steady hand was pointed to the head. The cover was so carelessly adjusted that the slightest raising of it, the motion of a finger upon Scrooge's part, would have disclosed the face. He thought of it, felt how easy it would be to do, and longed to do it, but had no more power to withdraw the veil than to dismiss the spectre at his side.
"Spirit," he said, "this is a fearful place. In leaving it I shall not leave its lesson. Trust me, let us go."
Still the ghost pointed with an unmoved finger to the head.
"Well, I understand you," Scrooge returned, "and I would do it if I could, but I have not the power, Spirit, I have not the power."
Again it seemed to look upon him.
"If there is any person in the town who feels emotion caused by this man's death," said Scrooge, quite agonised, "show that person to me, Spirit, I beseech you."
The spirit spread its dark robe before him for a moment like a wing, and withdrawing it, revealed a room by daylight where a mother and her children were. She was expecting someone, and at length the long-expected knock was heard. She hurried to the door and met her husband, a man whose face was careworn and depressed, although he was young. There was a remarkable expression in it now, a kind of serious delight, of which he felt ashamed, and which he struggled to repress. "Is it good," she said, "or bad?" "Bad," he answered. "We are quite ruined?" "No. There is hope yet, Caroline." "Well, if he relents, there is. Nothing's past hope if such a miracle has happened." "Well, he's past relenting," said her husband. He's dead." She was a mild and patient creature if her face spoke truth, but she was thankful in her soul to hear it, and she said so, with clasped hands. She prayed forgiveness the next moment, and was sorry, but the first was the emotion of her heart. "To whom will our debt be transferred?" I don't know, but before that time we shall be ready with the money. We may sleep tonight with light hearts, Caroline." Yes, soften it as they would, their hearts were lighter. It was a happier house for this man's death. The only emotion that the ghost could show him caused by the event was one of pleasure.
"Well, let me see some tenderness connected with the death," said Scrooge, "or that dark chamber spirit which we left just now will be for ever present with me."
The ghost conducted him through several streets familiar to his feet, until they entered poor Bob Cratchit's house, and found the mother and the children seated around the fire. Quiet. Very quiet. The noisy little Cratchits were as still as statues in one corner, and sat looking up at Peter, who had a book before him. The mother and her daughters were engaged in sewing, but surely they were very quiet. The mother laid her work upon the table and put her hand up to her face. "The colour hurts me eyes," she said. "The colour? Oh, poor Tiny Tim."
"They're better now again," said Cratchit's wife. "It makes them weak by candlelight, and I wouldn't show weak eyes to your father when he comes home for the world. It must be near his time."
"Past it, rather," Peter answered, shutting up his book. "But I think he's walked a little slower than he used these last few evenings, mother." They were quiet again. At last she said, and in a steady, cheerful voice that only faltered once,
"Well, I've known him walk with Tiny Tim upon his shoulder very fast indeed."
"And so have I," cried Peter. "Often. And so have I," exclaimed another. So had all.
"But he was very light to carry," she resumed, intent upon her work, "and his father loved him so that he was no trouble, no trouble. Oh, and there's your father now at the door."
Bob was very cheerful with them, and spoke pleasantly to all the family. He looked at the work upon the table, and praised the industry and speed of Mrs. Cratchit and the girls. It would be done long before Sunday, he said.
"Sunday?
"You went today, then, Robert?" said his wife.
"Yes, my dear," returned Bob. "I wish you could have gone. It would have done you good to see how green the place is. But you'll see it often. I promised him that we'd walk there on Sunday."
"My little child," cried Bob. "My little child."
He left the room and went upstairs into the room above, which was lighted cheerfully and hung with Christmas. There was a chair set close beside the child, and there were signs of someone having been there lately. Poor Bob sat down in it, and when he had thought a little and composed himself, he kissed the little face. He was reconciled to what had happened, and went down again, quite happy. They drew about the fire, and Bob told them of the extraordinary kindness of Mr. Scrooge's nephew, whom he had scarcely seen but once, and who, meeting him in the street that day, and seeing he looked a little down, inquired what had happened to distress him. "On which," said Bob, "for he's the pleasantest spoken gentleman you've ever heard, I told him. 'I am heartily sorry for it, Mr. Cratchit,' he said, 'and heartily sorry for your good wife.' And by the way, however he knew that, I don't know."
"Knew what, my dear?"
"Why, that you were a good wife." "Well, everybody knows that," said Peter. "Oh, very well observed, my boy," cried Bob. "I hope they do." "Heartily sorry," he said, "for your good wife. If I can be of service to you in any way," he said, giving me his card, "that's where I live. Pray come to me." So it wasn't, cried Bob, for the sake of anything he might be able to do for us, so much as for his kind way, that this was quite delightful. It really seemed as if he had known our Tiny Tim and felt with us. "I'm sure he's a good soul," said Mrs. Cratchit. "You'd be surer of it, my dear," returned Bob, "if you saw and spoke to him. I shouldn't be at all surprised, mark what I say, if he got Peter a better situation."
"Only hear that, Peter," said Mrs. Cratchit.
"And then," cried one of the girls, "Peter will be keeping company with someone and setting up for himself." "Get along with you," retorted Peter, grinning. "Oh, it's as likely as not," said Bob, "one of these days. But there's plenty of time for that, my dear. But however and whenever we part from one another, I'm sure we shall none of us forget poor Tiny Tim, shall we, or this first parting that there was among us?" "Never, father," cried they all. "And I know," said Bob, "I know, my dears, that when we recollect how patient and how mild he was, although he was a little child, we shall not quarrel easily among ourselves and forget poor Tiny Tim in doing it." "No, never, father," they all cried again. "I'm very happy," said little Bob. "I am very happy."
"Spectre,"
said Scrooge,
Something informs me that our parting moment is at hand. I know it, but I know not how. Tell me what man that was who we saw lying dead."
The spirit moved on, and Scrooge joined it once again until they reached an iron gate. He paused to look around before entering. A churchyard. Here, then, the wretched man whose name he had now to learn lay underneath the ground. It was a worthy place, walled in by houses, overrun by grass and weeds, the growth of vegetation's death, not life, choked up with too much burying, fat with repleted appetite. A worthy place. The spirit stood amongst the graves and pointed down to one. Scrooge advanced towards it, trembling. The phantom was exactly as it had been, but he dreaded that he saw new meaning in its solemn shape.
Before I draw nearer to that stone to which you point," said Scrooge, "answer me one question. Are these the shadows of the things that will be, or are they the shadows of things that may be only?"
Still the ghost pointed downwards to the grave by which it stood.
"Well, men's courses will foreshadow certain ends to which, if persevered in, they must lead," said Scrooge. "But if the courses be departed from, the ends will change. Say it is thus with what you show me."
The spirit was as immovable as ever. Scrooge crept towards it, trembling as he went, and following the finger, read upon the stone of the neglected grave his own name. Ebenezer Scrooge.
"Am I the man who lay upon the bed?" he cried upon his knees. The finger pointed from the grave to him and back again. "No, spirit! Oh, no!" The finger was still there. "Spirit!" he cried, clutching at its robe. "Hear me! I am not the man I was. I will not be the man I must have been but for this intercourse. Why show me this if I am past all hope?" For the first time the hand appeared to shake. "Good spirit!" he pursued, as down upon the ground he fell before it. "Your nature intercedes for me and pities me. Assure me that I may yet change the shadows you have shown me by an altered life." The kind hand trembled. "I will honour Christmas in my heart and try to keep it in all the year. I will live in the past, the present, and the future. The spirits of all three shall strive within me. I will not shut out the lessons that they teach. Oh, tell me I may sponge away the writing on this stone."
In his agony he caught the spectral hand. It sought to free itself, but he was strong in his entreaty and detained it. The spirit, stronger yet, repulsed him. Holding up his hands in a last prayer to have his fate reversed, he saw an alteration in the phantom's hood and dress. It shrunk, collapsed, and dwindled down into a bedpost. Yes, and the bedpost was his own. The bed was his own. The room was his own. And best and happiest of all, the time before him was his own to make amends in. "Oh, I will live in the past, the present, and the future," Scrooge repeated as he scrambled out of bed. "The spirits of all three shall strive within me. Oh, Jacob Marley, heaven and the Christmas time be praised for this. I say it on my knees, old Jacob, on my knees. Oh, they're not torn down," cried Scrooge, folding one of his bed curtains in his arms. "They are not torn down, rings and all. They are here. I am here. The shadows of the things that would have been may be dispelled. They will be. I know they will." His hands were busy with his garments all this time, turning them inside out, putting them on upside down, tearing them, mislaying them, making them parties to every kind of extravagance. "Oh, I don't know what to do," cried Scrooge, laughing and crying in the same breath. "I am as light as a feather. I'm as happy as an angel. I'm as merry as a schoolboy. Oh, I'm as giddy as a drunken man. A Merry Christmas to everybody. A Happy New Year to all the world. Hello there. Whoop, hello. Ha, ha." He had frisked into the sitting room and was now standing there, perfectly winded. "Oh, well, there's the saucepan that the gruel was in," cried Scrooge, starting off again and going round the fireplace. "There's the door by which the ghost of Jacob Marley entered. There's the corner where the ghost of Christmas Present sat. It's all right. It's all true. It all happened. Really, for a man who had been out of practice for so many years, it was a splendid laugh, a most illustrious laugh, the father of a long line of brilliant laughs. "I don't know what day of the month it is," said Scrooge. "I don't know how long I've been among the spirits. I don't know anything. I'm quite a baby." Running to the window, he opened it and put out his head. "What's today?" cried Scrooge, calling downward to a boy in Sunday clothes. "Aye," returned the boy. "What's today, my fine fellow?" "Today," replied the boy. "Why, it's Christmas Day." "It's Christmas Day," said Scrooge to himself. "I haven't missed it. The spirits have done it all in one night. Well, they can do anything they like. Of course they can. Of course they can." "Hello, my dear fellow." "Hello," returned the boy. "Do you know the poulterers in the next street but one at the corner?" "I should hope I did." Oh, an intelligent boy, a remarkable boy. "Do you know whether they've sold the prize turkey that was hanging up there? Not the little prize turkey, the big one." "What, the one as big as me?" "What a delightful boy. It's a pleasure to talk to him." "Yes, my buck." "It's hanging there now." "Is it?
said Scrooge. "Go and buy it." "Walker!" exclaimed the boy. No, I'm in earnest. Go and buy it, and tell them to bring it here, that I may give them the direction where to take it. Come back with the man, and I'll give you a shilling. Come back with him in less than 5 minutes, I'll give you half a crown.
The boy was off like a shot.
"I'll send it to Bob Cratchit's," whispered Scrooge, rubbing his hands and splitting with a laugh. "He shan't know who sends it. It's twice the size of Tiny Tim."
The hand in which he wrote the address was not a steady one, but write it he did, somehow, and went downstairs to open the street door, ready for the coming of the poulterer's man. As he stood there, waiting his arrival, the knocker caught his eye.
"I shall love it as long as I live," cried Scrooge, patting it with his hand. "I scarcely ever looked at it before. What an honest expression it has in its face. It's a wonderful knocker. Oh, here's the turkey. Hello, whoop, hello, how are you? Merry Christmas."
It was a turkey. He could never have stood upon its legs, that bird.
"Why, it's impossible to carry that to Camden Town," said Scrooge. "You must have a cab."
The chuckle with which he said this, and the chuckle with which he paid for the turkey, and the chuckle with which he paid for the cab, and the chuckle with which he recompensed the boy, were only to be exceeded by the chuckle with which he sat down breathless in his chair and chuckled till he cried. He dressed himself all in his best, and at last got out into the streets. The people were by this time pouring forth as he had seen them with the ghost of Christmas present, and walking with his hands behind him, Scrooge regarded every one with a delighted smile. He had not gone far when, coming towards him, he beheld the portly gentleman who had walked into his counting-house the day before, and said,
"Scrooge and Marley's, I believe."
It sent a pang across his heart to think how this old gentleman would look upon him when they met, but he knew what path lay straight before him, and he took it.
"My dear sir,"
said Scrooge, quickening his pace and taking the old gentleman by both his hands.
"how do you do? I hope you succeeded yesterday. It was very kind of you. A Merry Christmas to you, sir."
Mr. Scrooge?
"Yes," said Scrooge, "that's my name, and I fear it may not be pleasant to you. Allow me to ask your pardon, and will you have the goodness—"
Here Scrooge whispered in his ear.
Lord bless me!
cried the gentleman, as if his breath were taken away. "My dear Mr. Scrooge, are you serious?"
"If you please," said Scrooge, "not a farthing less. A great many back payments are included in it, I assure you. Will you do me that favour?"
"Oh, my dear sir," said the other, shaking hands with him, "I don't know what to say to such munificence."
"Well, don't say anything, please," retorted Scrooge. "Come and see me. Will you come and see me?"
"Well, I will,"
cried the old gentleman, and it was clear he meant to do it.
"I thank you," said Scrooge. "I am much obliged to you. I thank you 50 times. Bless you."
He went to church, and walked about the streets, and watched the people hurrying to and fro, and patted children on the head, and questioned beggars, and looked down into the kitchens of the houses, and up into the windows, and found that everything could yield him pleasure. He had never dreamed that any walk, that anything, could give him so much happiness. In the afternoon he turned his steps towards his nephew's house. He passed the door a dozen times before he had the courage to go up and knock, but he made a dash, and he did it.
"Is your master at home, my dear?"
said Scrooge to the girl. Nice girl, very.
"Yes, sir." "Where is he, my love?"
He's in the dining room, sir, along with the mistress. I'll show you upstairs, if you please.
"Oh, thank you, he knows me," said Scrooge, with his hand already on the dining room lock. I'll go in here, my dear."
He turned it gently, and sidled his face in around the door. They were looking at the table, which was spread out in great array, for these young housekeepers are always nervous on such points, and like to see that everything is right.
"Fred,"
said Scrooge. Why, bless my soul!" cried Fred. "Who's that?"
"It is I, your Uncle Scrooge. I have come to dinner. Will you let me in, Fred?"
Let him in! It's a mercy he didn't shake his arm off. He was at home in 5 minutes. Nothing could be heartier. His niece looked just the same. So did Topper when he came. So did the plump sister when she came. So did everyone when they came. Wonderful party, wonderful games, wonderful unanimity, wonderful happiness. But he was early at the office next morning. Oh, he was early there. If only he could be there first and catch Bob Cratchit coming late. That was the thing he had set his heart upon. And he did it. Yes, he did. The clock struck 9. No Bob. 1:15. No Bob. He was full 18 minutes and a half behind his time. Scrooge sat with his door wide open that he might see him come in. His hat was off before he opened the door, his comforter too. He was on his stool in a jiffy, driving away with his pen as if he were trying to overtake 9 o'clock.
"Hello,"
growled Scrooge in his accustomed voice, as near as he could feign it.
"What do you mean by coming here at this time of day?"
I'm very sorry, sir, said Bob. I am behind my time.
You are, repeated Scrooge. Yes, I think you are. Step this way, if you please.
It's only once a year, sir, pleaded Bob, appearing from the tank. It shall not be repeated. I was making rather merry yesterday, sir.
Now I'll tell you what, my friend, said Scrooge. I am not going to stand this sort of thing any longer. And therefore, he continued, leaping from his stool and giving Bob such a dig in the waistcoat that he staggered backwards, and therefore I am about to raise your salary.
Bob trembled and got a little nearer to the ruler. He had a momentary idea of knocking Scrooge down with it, holding him and calling to the people in the court for help and a strait waistcoat.
A Merry Christmas, Bob,
said Scrooge with an earnestness that could not be mistaken, as he clapped him on the back.
A merrier Christmas, Bob, my good fellow, than I have given you for many a year. I'll raise your salary and endeavour to assist your struggling family, and we will discuss your affairs this very afternoon over a Christmas bowl of smoking bishop, Bob. Now make up the fires and buy another coal scuttle before you dot another I, Bob Cratchit.
Scrooge was better than his word. He did it all, and infinitely more. And to Tiny Tim, who did not die, he was a second father. He became as good a friend, as good a master, and as good a man as the good old city knew, or any other good old city, town, or borough in the good old world. Some people laughed to see the alteration in him, but he let them laugh and little heeded them, for he was wise enough to know that nothing ever happened on this globe for good at which some people did not have their fill of laughter in the outset. His own heart laughed, and that was quite enough for him. He had no further contact with the spirits, but lived upon the total abstinence principle ever afterwards, and it was always said of him that he knew how to keep Christmas well if any man alive possessed the knowledge. May that be truly said of us, and all of us. And so, as Tiny Tim observed, God bless us, everyone.
That was part 4 of A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. Adapted and performed by Gary Andrews, with original music by Joy Tinniswood. A Christmas Carol is an Egotrip media presentation of an Archway Theatre Company production.